This is a story about a man named Dennis McGuire. Dennis McGuire was killed last night by the state of Ohio. Took him 15 minutes to die. By the way, I'm sorry, he was not killed last night. He was killed today, Thursday, his date of death, January 16th, 2014. Dennis McGuire is not a guy who anybody who you care about would have much sympathy for. In 1989, he sexually assaulted, raped, killed a pregnant woman. So I don't, a woman named Joy Stewart. One of my objections to the death penalty is that it makes me feel some degree of sympathy for guys who I don't want to waste my time feeling sympathy for. But I'm sympathetic toward him because he was executed by a government in the United States of America, and I was always sort of brought up, led to believe that the government in the United States came and saved you at the end, didn't kill you. But they killed Dennis McGuire, and they killed him with a new mixture of drugs in Ohio because the previous mixture, the pharmaceutical company that had provided the previous mixture, didn't provide the mixture anymore to Ohio because they're against the death penalty. So they came up with a couple of new drugs here, and in the end, it took Dennis McGuire 15 minutes to die today, the day he was executed. And here I'm going to read a little bit from the story from the Associated Press, which of course has no position on capital punishment. It's just reporting what happened. First, in attempting to halt his execution ahead of time, McGuire's attorneys had argued last week he was at substantial risk of agony and terror, that was the phrase they used in the court filings, while straining to catch his breath as he experienced a medical phenomenon known as air hunger. But the judge rejected that. Ohio officials used intravenous doses of two drugs, a sedative and a painkiller, to put McGuire to death today for the rape. His adult children were there sobbing. McGuire, before he left, thanked the family of Joy Stewart, the woman who he killed in 1989, for their kind words in a letter that he apparently received from them. I'm reading from the Associated Press story. But then the Associated Press goes on to describe the execution. McGuire opened and shut his left hand as if waving to his daughter, son, and daughter-in-law. More than a minute later, he raised himself up, looked in the direction of his family, and said, "I love you, I love you." McGuire was still for almost 5 minutes, the report goes on, then emitted a loud snort as if he were snoring and continued to make that sound over the next several minutes. He also soundlessly opened and shut his mouth several times as his stomach rose and fell. "Oh my God," his daughter, Amber McGuire, said as she observed her father's final moments. A coughing sound was Dennis McGuire's last apparent movement, the Associated Press says, at 10:43 this morning. He was pronounced dead 10 minutes later at 10:53. I don't see how we can read that in this country and feel comfortable executing people. It's very clear that he suffered. Nothing strikes me more than reading that and try telling me that that doesn't meet anyone's standard of cruel and unusual. It's the most unusual thing that had ever happened to him, and an incredibly unusual moment, and seems very clearly cruel. If we want to go killing people in this country, if that's what we think is the right way to mete out justice in serious cases like the one involving this woman, like the murder of Joy Stewart, then we ought to shoot this guy in the head. Or use a guillotine that we know is sharp, although as we know from other countries, sometimes the guillotine isn't sharp enough, it doesn't go all the way down. And that obviously would meet our standard of cruel. I imagine that if we have 4 or 5 people shoot a guy in the head, he'd die very quickly, and that would be the end of that. His face would be maimed and mangled, and you couldn't really have an open casket at the funeral. Maybe if you're on death row, you lose that right, but he'd be dead. But we don't want to shoot people anymore because we feel weird about shooting people, which, given the frequency with which we shoot innocent people in this country, seems peculiar. But if we want to have the death penalty, then let's just go ahead and shoot people in the head. Let's get a bunch of guys in the room and take 5 or 6 shots at his head. He'll be dead in a second. There's no way around it. Some other guys can shoot at his heart. Let's just go Bonnie and Clyde on him, and that'll end it quickly, and we'll know that it's happened, instead of this system which we thought would somehow sanitize it, but but it ends up being barbaric. And I don't think we ought to sanitize it anyway. Even if this worked, if you took some pill and you were dead in a second, I don't think the state's killing of someone ought to be sanitized. And frequently, depending on your definition of the word frequently, we know that sometimes the state kills the wrong guy. We certainly know the state lets guys out on death row, as many states have, because they had the wrong guy. So they didn't have the wrong guy here, by all accounts. He killed Joy Stewart. His lawyers made the case that he'd been sexually abused as a child. No one seems to, near as I can tell, be disputing that. But whether that counts as mitigation to avoid the death sentence, I have no idea. I don't need mitigation for the death sentence. I never would have given it to him in the first place. I'm not soft on crime either. I know a lot of other people who are very strongly anti-death penalty aren't soft on crime either. We think somebody who commits a crime like this ought to go to prison the rest of their life without any possibility of parole. But should we uncover some sort of mistake in the case, we could rectify it. And he would anyway get the opportunity to live in prison, and we wouldn't be the kind of country that goes and kills people.